went clubbing on our anniversary after our fight. I came home to empty closets. I'm not sure why I'm even writing this. I want to say that I'm doing it because I need to get my side of the story out there, but honestly, I'm mostly doing it because there's nothing else that I can do. I've lost everything that I had because of my own selfishness, and I don't know how to fix it. This, pouring my heart out to strangers, is the only thing that I can do right now. Okay, so about a year ago was when I noticed that something was wrong. Well, not wrong, just off. Things started to seem almost strained between my husband James and I. Maybe strained is too strong a word. Things just seemed different. We've always been that incredibly annoying lovey-dovey couple, the one that just has to hold each other while at the movies or the amusement park, the one that kind of bothers everyone with their amount of PDA. But besides affection, though, we were a team. We did everything together. We woke up at the same time and got ready at the same time. Taking care of the kids was also a joint effort. We alternated the days that each of us picked them up from school after work, or made them dinner, or put them to bed. Our house functioned like a well-oiled and loved machine. Our kids never had to ask for anything, especially affection, and we never seemed to run out of affection for each other. We were constantly around each other when we weren't at work. He would hover around me when I was cooking, taking a shower, or helping the kids with their homework, and I would do the same for him. People often wondered how we stayed so in love and infatuated with each other after so long being married. And honestly, as silly as it sounds, the trick to staying so in love was to keep being in love. It was making the choice, going out of your way to decide to love someone and continue being with them. Things would obviously get difficult and stressful and hard. That was just how life worked, but we kept our marriage together by making sure that we chose us and to keep loving each other every day. I thought we would always do that. I thought our marriage would be fine, so long as we could keep that alive between us. But sometime last year it died. Now I'm not naive or an idealist. I've been with James for almost a decade. I knew then and know now that our marriage couldn't have always been without its ups and downs. But like I said, I thought we had cracked the code, that we had figured out how to avoid that. But we weren't immune, and the cracks were finally starting to show. It wasn't anything serious, not at first at least. We just fell out of step a bit. Our well-oiled machine started to slow down and become less efficient. Our schedules became out of tune. Sometimes I would get up and I wouldn't even wake him, and sometimes he would do the same. Sometimes I'd have left the house for work before he even opened his eyes. Then miscommunication settled in between us, and that was the worst part. Before, we were always talking. We texted each other throughout our work days, and he was the first person I called once work was done and I was driving home. We talked as we did our morning routines and as we got the kids ready for school or made breakfast. Up until the point of us getting in different cars, we were talking. But then that changed. We didn't talk as much or text as much. Because of that, things got lost in translation. We would show up at the same time to our kids' school even though only one of us was supposed to pick them up. Neither of us could remember who. And sometimes one of us would forget that it was our turn to make breakfast or dinner. This led to us ordering takeout for dinner, or giving our kids just some random assortment of fruit for breakfast one too many times. This bothered me, but I just thought it was a rough patch. We had hit those before, where things were awkward and distant between us, and the love seemed weak. But we always pulled through after a few weeks. We always got out of it. It had never gotten that bad or lasted that long. It had been going on for so long, this disturbance in our marriage, that our kids managed to notice. Our daughter was the observant one, always vigilant, so I wasn't surprised that she noticed something early on. Our son would eventually notice that something was off too, though, and soon enough they were both asking us if everything was okay and if we still loved each other. Obviously, we told them that everything was fine and that we still did, but I wasn't so sure anymore at that point. I had no idea what to do. I barely even understood what was going on, or why it had even happened. How could I fix our marriage if I didn't even know what was wrong? It wasn't like I didn't love him anymore. I did, and I knew that he still loved me, but there was just something wrong. There was a disconnect between us, and I didn't know what to do about it. At some point, I started to wonder if we had just run our course, that we'd be one of those cases where the relationship didn't end because of infidelity or a lack of love, but because the love just wasn't enough to sustain it anymore. We started to have little fights here and there, things that we never used to do. Not like we didn't fight at all, we aren't saints, but it always got resolved in a few minutes, with one of us bursting into a laugh or pulling the other into a hug or kiss. But these fights were different. They didn't end. There was no resolution. We would both just get tired of yelling or whispering angrily if the kids were home, and then we would just leave it. None of the issues we were fighting about ever got resolved. We just kept going, both stewing in anger. It got so bad that I started to complain to my friends about it. Obviously, they took my side on the whole thing. One of them tried to be more objective and tell me that I should try to work things out, that we'd been together for so long, and that we can't just lose a marriage like ours because of some non-existent problem. My other friend, though, Casey, who had never liked James for reasons she could never fully explain, took the offensive approach. She told me that it was all his fault and that I needed a break from him, that he was probably cheating on me and starting fights because he felt guilty. I shouldn't have listened to her. I didn't want to listen to her. Casey had always been the more vindictive and aggressive one in the group. But after months of this weirdness between us and James's distant attitude toward me, some of what she said started to take root. The suspicions that she planted in me made me reciprocate his distance, and this led to more tension between us. Tension that finally snapped a few weeks ago when we had our biggest fight ever. I had a really intense workload that day. Even the paperwork had paperwork, and I had enough meetings to last me a lifetime. My head was all over the place from the second that I woke up. All I had for breakfast that morning was a piece of toast, which I ate over the sink as I thought about more work. I remember hearing James moving around the kitchen too, making his own breakfast and something for the kids to eat too, but moving around each other without really acknowledging the other's presence had become standard practice at that point. I remembered him saying something to me, but I didn't pay attention. I just muttered something in response and then left. Little did I know that what he was telling me was that he wouldn't be able to make it to pick the kids up from school and that I needed to get them. I had heard him say something about the kids and something about work, but my head was so full of other things I couldn't make sense of any of it. I wouldn't realize my mistake until I got home a little after 6 and checked my phone. I usually kept it off while I was working so I could get as much done as possible. The second I turned it on, the messages and missed calls came pouring in. Most of them were from James, but some were from the school principal. As you can imagine, I was beyond confused as to why my kid's principal would be calling, but I just assumed that maybe my son had gotten into some trouble again, and now James and I would be forced to sit through another meeting with her. I was able to call and ask when she wanted to meet when I heard James coming down the stairs. He glared at me the second we locked eyes, and I was immediately on edge. Sure, things had been rocky between us, but that didn't warrant this, right? I asked him what was wrong, and he asked me why I didn't answer the phone. I told him that my phone was off, and I was surprised he would even ask. He knew that I kept my phone off most of the time at work. That was when he started yelling. He told me that he had made sure to let me know in the morning that there was an important deal at work that he had to close and he wouldn't be able to pick the kids. It was important for the company and his potential promotion, and I'd ruined it for him because he had to end his business meeting. The principal called him when she couldn't reach me, and he had tried to call me to get me to go pick them up, but I was unreachable. He tried to wait it out for as long as possible. Close the deal and end the meeting in 30 minutes at most, so the kids wouldn't be waiting there for too long. But the time kept flying by, and soon enough, the kids had been waiting behind at school for an hour, and he still wasn't done. He had to end the meeting early and drive down as fast as he could to get them. And then he'd come back home to wait for me and stew in his disappointment and anger. I tried to defend myself, but he just kept going on, and then suddenly he was yelling about other things that he had obviously buried deep down and were coming out now that he had an opportunity to attack me. He told me that I didn't listen to him or respect him or his work, that I was selfish and didn't care about anyone but myself. I always put myself first and didn't do anything for anyone else. He said a lot of hurtful things, and they stung more than I expected them to, but more than that, they made me angry. Yes, I'd screwed up, I knew that, but why did he always have to act like such a saint? Like he was the only one who had ever been wronged in the relationship and had never done anything wrong ever. It was laughable to me. how much he acted so holier than thou, and I made sure to let him know that he wasn't so innocent. He was selfish too, and inconsiderate. There were times where I would be the one to pick the kids up for a week straight, and he never once heard me complain. But this one time that I didn't do it, he threw this big tantrum. It was ridiculous. He was ridiculous, and I made sure to call him out. The result of that was a huge fight. Insults and accusations were hurled back and forth, and we got all up in each other's faces, pointing and waving wildly. It wasn't until our voices got so loud that we woke our daughter and she came downstairs looking for us that we finally quieted down. Seeing her standing there, practically hugging the doorframe like she was scared, sobered both of us up real quick. We acted like nothing was wrong, like we'd just had a little spat, and then put her back to bed. Our fight never got resolved. We just never brought it up again. We ignored it because addressing it would have meant addressing whether or not we actually meant the things that we said, and I don't know if either of us were ready for the answer. The resentment between us continued to bubble, and my anger towards him continued to be fueled by Casey, who insisted that I hadn't done anything wrong. I'd merely made a small mistake, one that was resolved pretty quickly, and that James didn't get to ambush me because of it. I was so upset that I convinced myself that James needed to be punished for what he did, and an opportunity to do that presented itself just a week after the fight. It was our anniversary. We always celebrated it each year, but this one would make 10 years together, so it was infinitely more special. James always took me out to dinner for it, and then we watched a movie when we got home in honor of our first date together at the movie theater. I decided that I was going to miss out on all of James's plans, because I knew nothing would hurt him more. At first, all I was going to was spend the day at Casey's place and ignore his calls. That way he would regret what he'd done. But then Casey started talking about us going out clubbing for the night, something we hadn't done since I was a lot younger and before I was married. I didn't want to go, not at first though, but then I started to think that it would rub it in James's face even more if I went, even if he didn't actually see me or know where I went. We went clubbing that night, and I honestly didn't plan on getting drunk. I just wanted to drink a few since it had been a while and maybe dance a bit. And that was how it started. It was all completely normal at first. I danced and drank in limited amounts, and in between that I couldn't help but think about how much I'd rather be back at the house, watching whatever terrible movie James had chosen on our couch. These thoughts made me feel weak, like I wasn't strong enough to ignore James for one night when he'd practically been ignoring me for a whole year now. It made me want to be even more reckless and wild, just so I could punish James even more. That was when I started to drink more, and then I drank even more than that. Casey was ecstatic about the whole thing. She was glad that I was finally letting loose after 10 years of marriage and 2 kids. She encouraged me to get even more wasted, and I happily obliged. She made videos of the whole thing, and I was so happy and drunk that I couldn't even pay attention to where the videos ended up, or if she was sending them to anyone. I started dancing again, and that was when I noticed that someone was watching me. It was this guy at the bar. Handsome, tall, dark eyes. He was staring at me like he wanted me, like I was the sexiest thing he'd ever seen. That made me dance slower, more sensual, like I was trying to lure him to me. It worked, and within a few minutes he walked over and slid in behind me. We danced really close, and it felt so liberating in the moment, like I was dancing away the months of resentment with this stranger who looked at me like he wanted to take off my clothes right there on the dance floor. It was so intoxicating, that feeling, that I didn't even realize when he turned me around until I was suddenly face to face with him, and there was barely any space between us. I could see Casey in the corner of my eye, phone still in her head, and looking like she wanted me to go for it. So I did. I closed the distance between us and kissed him. He kissed me passionately, and our dancing got even slower and more intense until we were practically grinding against each other in front of a bar full of people. After that, we snuck into one of the bathrooms as things continued to get steamy between us. Casey followed after us for a while, teasing and recording. She was already too drunk, but was still as supportive as ever, like she wanted me to ruin everything. Things didn't get too far in the bathroom. We got handsy and way too close, but I didn't sleep with him. After all that dancing and drinking so much after years of practically being sober, I was tired and feeling a bit sick. The second we got behind those bathroom doors, all I wanted was to go home. I eventually pushed the guy off and walked out. I held on to Casey, and together we stumbled out of the bar. She was too out of it to do more than just say nonsense and swipe on her phone, so I had to get us a ride back to her place. All I could think about as the car drove was how James spent the day. Whether he was upset that I ditched him on our anniversary, or whether he didn't care at all and was happy that I was gone. Even though I'd just done something terribly unforgivable, I hoped with everything in me that it was the first one. That night I couldn't sleep. I stayed awake almost all night wondering why James hadn't called me at all, or why he wasn't worried enough to come looking for me. I worked myself into a frenzy, wondering if he didn't call because he wanted nothing to do with me anymore, or whether he had even planned anything at all. In the end, I worried myself into exhaustion and fell asleep. The next day, after saying goodbye to Casey and making sure that she was all right, I went back home. It suddenly seemed like there was nothing more important in the world than finally talking things out with James. After months of passive aggression and horrible distance, I was finally ready to squash whatever it was between us and get my husband back. I know how it seems. Me suddenly wanting to fix things with him after I'd just betrayed him. Like I was scared he'd instantly up and leave if he ever heard about it, since we practically hated each other already. I was scared that he would somehow find out, even though I knew there was no way he could, but that wasn't the only reason. Being intimate with and around someone else made me feel powerful in the moment, but when I was alone in Casey's spare room, all I felt was shame and regret. I wanted my husband back, so I was determined to go get him. I got out of the car and made my way to the front door with determined steps. It was the weekend, so I expected what usually happened during the weekend, for James to be making some snacks for the kids while they played outside or watching with a smile as they practiced their instruments. It was a familiar and comfortable expectation, one I was eager to be involved in. I walked into the house, but there was none of that. The house was silent. There was no screaming coming from the backyard or the sound of the knife hitting the chopping board from the kitchen. The house was completely still. I tried not to let myself panic. I tried to keep things cool and remind myself that there was obviously some logical solution somewhere, but as I rushed upstairs and pulled open drawer after drawer, each one empty, I started to panic. I called him. I called him again and again, but there was no response. After calling for almost 30 minutes, he finally sent me a message. All it said was that I'd better go check my friend's Instagram story. My heart kind of sank to stomach, and very vaguely, I could remember that Casey kept waving her phone around and recording us the previous night. My hands were shaking as I opened the app and scrolled to Casey's page. I was confused for a brief moment because there was nothing posted on her story, but then I remembered that she had a second account that she used for personal things and close friends. It made me feel a bit sick to even click on it, but I knew that I had to. There were multiple videos and pictures posted onto that story. Most were of her having a good time and dancing, but sprinkled in between those pictures were pictures and videos of me getting drunk and kissing some random guy at the bar. Towards the end, there were even videos of me and that same guy kissing and pushing each other into a bathroom stall. I couldn't believe what I was seeing, but I instantly knew that James must have seen it. That was the only thing that could explain why him and the kids were just gone. I started to fully panic as I tried calling again. I wasn't even sure what I could hope to tell him. How could I even begin to explain myself? I could tell him the truth, that nothing happened in the bathroom, but what would that do? I had already cheated on him when I'd kissed and danced on that guy. I had no idea what I was going to tell him or how I was going to explain myself, but I knew that I had to, and I knew where James was most likely to go with our kids with him. So I went upstairs to freshen up and get changed. It would look even worse for me if I showed up looking like I had just come from the club. And then I made the drive to James's mother's house. His car was in the driveway, and I thanked the stars that I was right before I rushed to the door, but before I could even knock, James stepped out. He stood by the doorway with his arms folded, looking disgusted and angry. I walked up to him and tried to say something, anything that would make what I'd done seem less horrible, but he just held up his hand. He told me that there was nothing to say because he'd seen all he needed to see, and now he understood that he never knew me at all. He told me that he and the kids were going to be staying there for the next couple of weeks, until he could get his own place and move them out completely. I asked him why he was moving out, why he was taking them from me, my voice sounding pathetic and small. And he just told me point blank that he wanted a divorce, that it was a decision he'd been sitting on for a while now, and me cheating on him, on camera even, was the nail in the coffin. Without even thinking, I grabbed onto his arm and started begging him. Things had been rough in the past year, and we'd had our issues, but this was no way to solve things. I told him just as much, but he wasn't hearing it. He just told me that I'd better go because I was being loud and the kids were trying to sleep. He sounded cold and he sounded disinterested, but most of all, he sounded completely done with me. I had no choice but to drive back, and then I cried on the couch of that empty house for hours. I tried to call Casey, to scream at her for being so stupid because I had nowhere else to put my anger, but she didn't even respond. It's been a couple of days since then, and nothing new has happened. James hasn't sent me divorce papers yet. I don't know if that's a good thing or if it's just a matter of time before I get them now. I don't know what I'm going to do or how I can fix any of this. I destroyed 10 years of marriage in one night, and I have no one else to blame.